Okay, quick disclaimer. This contains adult topics, so we highly recommend that you listen to this by yourself before listening to it with your children and determine whether or not this is age appropriate for them.
How's it going, everybody? We are going to react to JP SEARS here. Biggest thing to note, disclaimer, as always, is that just because we're reacting to this guy doesn't mean we support everything he does. So let's get into it.
I used to think pretty much like a leftist about abortion. Not only did I think women should have the right to an abortion, I thought getting an abortion was a pretty empowered choice for a woman to make. Like, you go, girl, kill that baby. And I also used to think that, like, in the first trimester, the baby that you're about to kill, it's not really a baby yet, because I've heard other people say that, and it's a pretty convenient thing to think. Here's my most embarrassing blunder about my old thinking about abortion. Now, I'm not proud of it, but it's true, so I'm going to share it. Here it is. The thinking that was going through my mind about abortion, it wasn't my thinking. The leftist propaganda about abortion got to me. I'll admit it. I fell for it. And it's 100% my fault. It was nothing other than mental weakness and a lack of self-awareness on my part that allowed it. And the scariest thing about it was I didn't know it was propaganda. I thought it was my own thinking. Leftist propaganda about abortion, JP? Huh? Yeah, without sugarcoating it, I think there's evil, tyrannical people in this world, controlled by Satan, if I'm being honest, and I am, who want to keep the population of the world small so it's easier for them to control everybody, and they want to destroy the nuclear family so people grow up weaker and are therefore more controllable.
So I wanted to ask you about this because he says in there simultaneously it was his fault, but he also says that it wasn't his thinking. And I don't know, I kind of found that a little odd because when I hear that, it's like if you believed propaganda, it's still your thinking, right?
What I took him to mean was that he had never actually thought the issue through. He had simply believed what he had been told.
Okay.
In opposition to so many other videos that JP SEARS has done where he's clearly thought things through. I mean, even in the intro, he has exhibited so much thought with his, little sarcastic comments about the opposing side. So I took him to be saying he simply believed what he was told rather than having critically thought about it himself.
Yeah. And the destruction of the nuclear family thing is interesting too, but
yeah, he seems to be really onto something here. And I don't know if JP's a Christian, but he has some videos where he hints at a Christian worldview at the very least, and invoking Satan. that's certainly from a Christian worldview. So it's interesting to me, to say the least.
Yeah, that was super interesting.
And knowing's half the battle. Getting people to get abortions is a big strategy of theirs, and they get people to get abortions through their propaganda that gets people to think that not only are abortions okay, but abortions should be a celebrated, empowered choice. More on that in a minute. But the moral of this story is that propaganda got to me. Now my pronouns are he who thinks for himself, so I can better draw a distinction between what my heart feels and what my own critical thinking says versus the propaganda that comes into my mind from outside sources. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I've made a lot of progress in this area. Thus, I no longer believe abortions are just okay, and I certainly don't believe there's something to be celebrated. I look at what I used to think and what's all over the leftist media today, and it's very clear that people are being persuaded to think about abortion as a virtue. This happens through weaponized morality. That's when you have manipulative people who get good people to think that doing something horrible is not only not horrible, but it's a good thing to do.
More like weaponized immorality, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's okay to weaponize morality, but it's immorality that's the problem.
It's a moral thing. In Nazi Germany, it was turn your neighbor in to face a certain death because it's the right thing to do. Now it's scream at your neighbor for not getting jabbed because it helps keep everyone safe. Or peacefully burn down buildings in Portland because racial equality is important. Or get an abortion because of women's empowerment. Sound familiar? Yeah. it's all weaponized morality. I will unapologetically say that pretending a baby isn't a baby and then killing the baby is not a virtue. It might be a choice, but it's certainly not a virtue. Having a choice is empowering, but that doesn't mean any choice you make is an empowered choice. For example, if you're over 21, you have the choice of whether or not to drink large amounts of alcohol every night. And if you choose to get drunk every night, that doesn't mean you're choosing an empowered choice. I think we'd all agree that though the choice is yours, choosing to drink excessively every night is a very disempowered choice. Yet weaponized...
He brings up such a good point there about choices. Choices are simply choosing between options, and the ability to make a choice doesn't make making that choice right. And I see where he's going, and I think this guy's usually spot on. You know, we don't endorse everything, of course, but that he's ever said, but he's usually very logical, and I like how he's pursuing this right now, and I want to see where he goes with it.
Yeah, full disclosure, I did watch this in advance. Michael hasn't watched it yet. By the way, I'm Elijah. This is Michael. So I'll be interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah, we'll see how he gets along with this. I do know he had a kid recently, so I wonder how that plays into it.
morality tries to get women to think that they're making an empowered choice.
But that was something I thought of as he was saying that earlier, was that the weaponized morality, or if you want to call it weaponized immorality, the idea being that not only do we offer people choices, our propaganda tries to influence people to believe a choice is either right or wrong, good or bad, better or best. And when the propaganda is pushing people in a direction that tells them something evil is good, sinful people are eventually going to flow in that direction, especially without oppositional speech, I guess, for lack of a better term. So it's kind of, it's just interesting because there was a time not that long ago that leftists would say they wanted abortions to be safe, legal, and rare.
Right.
And the question was always, well, if they're safe and if they're legal, why would it matter if they're rare?
Yeah.
Why would a leftist have ever wanted it to be rare if it's something to celebrate? So you can see how they've shifted the conversation. I think largely that's a result of abolitionists speaking properly about abortion, but that's not why we're here yet, at least.
If they choose to abort their baby. But what I consider to be a very empowered choice for women around reproduction is for them to have very strong discernment and boundaries about who they have sex with in the first place. Having sex with someone to fill a psychological
Really good
void so
point,
you can feel like
obviously.
you matter to them and are valued by them for a few moments is a very disempowered choice from the Genesis. But I got
The Christian definition for that is marriage.
an abortion, so I'm empowered now. No, because anything built on the foundation of a disempowered choice will simply be an extension of disempowerment. The illusion of empowered choice in the abortion scenario is maybe just a rationalization for not improving your self-esteem by using courage to make more empowered choices from the get-go that have you filling your psychological voids from within rather than using men to fill them. Hi again, feminists! Feel free to go back and listen to that part again. And just so you know, getting mad every time you hear someone say something you don't like doesn't make you empowered. It makes you unstable. Okay, G.
It's actually an interesting separate point, but that when him knowing that people are going to freak out about what he just said,
Yeah.
like he didn't actually say it this way, but he's exhibiting power over people who can't control their reactions to him. You know, and that's one of the things we try to teach our children, right? Is when somebody else does something you don't like, you need to control your response to it. And if you don't, then actually the other person's the one who's controlling you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I knew that when I was in third grade. Pretend poking my sister and telling her that she was the reason why she was getting angry.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do it that way, though.
EP, you've shared what you used to think about abortion. So what do you think about abortion? Great question. Here it is. I think abortions are evil, yet should be legal for the first couple months after conception. Say more, JP. I will. I truly believe that abortion is straight up killing babies. And not only is that not a virtue, that's evil. Yeah.
Straight up killing babies, but it should be legal for the first couple months. JP, Dude, I don't. There's like a 0% chance that you're watching this, but man, listen to what you're saying there. Listen to your logic. It's straight up killing people, but it should be legal for the first couple months. And I know you explain what you mean, but just listen to that logic. If that logic was used on anyone else, a 60-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, it's straight up killing them, but it should be legal in this specific time frame. That would be horrible, and it shows, I think, an underlying assumption about how you're viewing this. You're saying it's killing, you're saying it's a life, you're saying it's a human, but then the follow-up doesn't exactly match.
Well, I don't want to spoil what may be the ending for me at least, but is that I was wondering as he was progressing. So we're at an 8-minute point of about a 15-minute video. He was making arguments that were reasonably logical, but he never really revealed his assumptions or premises.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if at some point he was going to go off the rails because he wasn't actually on a true foundation of biblical theology, which is the only real foundation which we can actually talk about what is moral and what ought to be legal.
Right.
So he's making a good, what I'd almost call like a natural theology argument here, but at some point it'll be interesting to see how you would argue against him without being able to just invoke the Bible, which I think, of course, is perfectly legal in any argument. So we'll see. He definitely, I think, becoming unbiblical if he was ever sounding biblical in this.
Yeah.
Yet, if I imagine I'm a woman, as apparently a lot of men are doing nowadays, and I imagine I was raped, which is certainly an act of evil itself, and I got pregnant from it, I think I would get an abortion. Is that still evil? Like, I don't know, probably, but I'd still probably get one. Oh.
Yeah, so I don't know what he's going to say yet, but this is exactly what I meant by not having a biblical foundation.
Right.
Because that actually sounds really logical from there is no God who objectively is going to judge sin kind of morality. And I understand the thinking there, not that I agree with it at all, but I understand why somebody who isn't coming from a biblical standpoint could get to that point. Because that's actually everyone's argument on the street. Well, what if a woman's rape? Like, literally, like, what if a woman's rape is like the first question? And the fact that the Bible has answers to what to do in that situation is one thing where, okay, the rapist should be put to death, not the baby. But we need to be able to consider that, okay, it may be very difficult for this woman who herself doesn't love God, had something horrible done to her. It may be difficult for her to understand that in God's providence, he's provided a baby for her. I won't disagree with that being difficult.
Yeah, it's got to be really hard.
I mean, I don't want
It's got to be horrible.
Yeah, like I don't want my wife's rapist baby tomorrow. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't. It's not my goal in life, right?
Right.
But the idea being that you need to go back to what is objectively right and wrong, and what's the right way to deal with any situation. And he's starting to just get into, well, in this situation, it's going to be hard, even though naturally you can argue that making a woman a further perpetrator of a crime after herself being so victimized is only worse for her. I don't think he's going to acknowledge that, but even if you went there, it doesn't explain it for people sufficiently compared to thus saith the Lord.
Right. And ultimately the important thing to note is that rape and abortion are wrong for the same reasons. They both violate another person. One does it by ending the person's life. Another does it, obviously, sexually. And so they're both wrong for the same reasons. And he acknowledges it. He goes, is that evil? Probably. Well, why?
Yeah, and in his worldview, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
In his worldview, the evil's unavoidable. Where this woman may be able to do that evil because it is a greater good than forcing her to have a child. Whereas in the biblical worldview, we don't do evil that good may come, and we believe that with every sin, God has provided a way out of the temptation.
Right.
And so he's not able to get to that point where we have to do hard things because in God's providence, that's the situation we find ourselves in.
I love his face right here.
I love his shirt too.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, and you said a couple months after conception, like, why a couple months, JP? It's just kind of an arbitrary number.
Exactly.
But what I'm certain of, though, is late-term abortions and even mid-term abortions should be completely banned. And for the record, I don't believe any of the BS that says, well, a baby isn't a baby until we want it to be a baby. No. A baby is a baby from the moment of conception. And there's evil lunatics out there that want to be able to kill babies up until the moment of birth. And there's even a California bill that's been proposed that would allow people to kill babies up to 28 days after birth. There's no question in my mind that there's nothing but pure evil behind this. And if you give these evil lunatics an inch...
See, I think he doesn't understand what he's saying there, because if it's pure evil, which is contradiction of terms in one sense, but then you would never want to partake in it whatsoever.
And he literally says right now, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah.
And he's giving an inch.
Yeah, he's compromising in an area to accommodate a situation that's extremely serious and worth considering, and accommodate it wrongly. And this is the type of argumentation that will lose the whole argument. It's one of the reasons I'm an abolitionist is I don't think allowing abortion at any time, if I call it evil, is ever acceptable, because then every other possible situation that I would call evil, I don't have a leg to stand on to argue against.
His foundation, if it was solely based on the Bible, so solely based on Christianity and the Bible, if he started from there, rather than starting from abortion is evil, life begins at conception. So life begins at conception, and then he goes to the next step, abortion is evil, but then it's lost. The next steps are lost, and I think that comes back to that biblical foundation. Without that biblical foundation, then at any point in the process of logic here, you can rail off. 2 months, but it's evil. But 2 months.
I mean, just practically speaking, I think you end up with a gigantic issue, and one of them is, if abortion is going to be legal at all, then people need to be trained to do it. You need to have people training to do it in medical schools. You need to have them practicing to do it. You need to have situations set up where people are doing something you're calling objectively evil, but then somehow you think you're going to put constraints around it where, well, in this one situation it's okay, and that just doesn't work. It's just impossible to regulate something like that. One of the things we've predicted for a long time is that the moment somebody passes we'll call it a rape and incest bill, where abortion's legal in those cases. We'll say rape, incest, and health of the mother, the three biggest exceptions people bring up. The moment somebody passes a bill like that and all other abortions are illegal, we've predicted for a long time we'll just see an increase in reported rapes, reported incest, and reported health risks to mothers who are pregnant. Like, people who want to do this are going to find a way to do it if we give them a leg at all to stand on. The only way to properly address the situation is to criminalize it and then to deal with it with proper justice.
Right.
They'll take a mile, but they'll take that mile inch by inch, so your mind acclimates along the way and can't quite distinguish how outrageously evil that is.
Here he is.
So how is 2 months not an inch?
Yeah, he's right here is where he's just showing he's still not thinking it through. And I think it's because God has granted him a lot of very good conservative values somewhere deep down inside. He's given him a YouTube page that pays him a lot of money, no doubt, for the ads and the monetization. Look, he's got almost 1 million views, and this was less than 4 weeks ago. And so at some point, he's going to be able to say what he wants to say. And having absolutely perfect inspired logic isn't the problem. He has decent logic with bad premises. Or good logic. I'd even say he has valid logic with premises that if you simply denied them, his logic still makes sense, but we know it's bad because of the bad premise.
Right.
acts are. Unchecked, you can only just imagine where these evil lunatics will have abortion in 20 years. Oh, your kid's 2 years old. Does he talk yet? No. Oh, well.
Actually, that's a really good point that contradicts his earlier point. What if you were raped and now your kid is 2 years old? Why was it okay to kill the child according to his own logic?
Right.
Which he said was evil and it was truly a baby. Why was it okay before 2 months? But if the woman said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to try my best, I'm going to love this child, I'm going to do what I think is right, and then the kid turns 1, and suddenly one day the kid looks like the rapist a little, reminds her of the guy.
Right.
Why not kill the child then?
Yeah.
And he doesn't have an answer to that, and he won't have a good answer to that. The answer is she can't kill that child anytime without herself being a criminal guilty of murder.
Yeah.
Well, a clump of cells isn't really a human until it learns language. So why don't you take him out back for an abortion while we celebrate you? Okay. So you might be saying, okay, JP, you think abortion is pure evil, yet you don't think it should be 100% banned? Don't you think we have a responsibility to protect unborn children? That's a great question, and I could imagine how that could be very true. And another way I'm looking at it in this moment is through the lens of a freedom maximalist. For the baby inside that mother, God has assigned that mother and father to be the protectors of him or her. And in the name of not letting the God-given freedom and sovereignty over the mother's being infringed on while the baby's inside of her, I do worry that outsiders stepping in to try to protect the unborn child could be an erosion of freedom that exists on a very slippery slope. And if the parents not only don't protect the fetus...
I had a feeling he'd go there.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why a lot of libertarians are pro-choice, even ones that would call themselves conservative or moral. You don't have almost an argument for any law at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
With what he's saying. And if...
There is no standard. There's no standard by which he's coming up with this as a freedom maximalist. That's the problem. If his standard is that's evil, it should be punished by the government biblically. Then, if that's the standard, then we can go to the Bible and we can have a Bible discussion over what does that mean. What
Sure.
does that look like?
Look, he's not a freedom maximalist. Is it, I'm saying it right?
Yeah.
He's not a freedom maximalist in regards to somebody taking money from his bank account.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if somebody wanted the freedom to go ahead and do what they wanted with their body and it was taken from his bank account, he'd say, no, that's immoral. We have a law against it that enforces that you shouldn't do that or you're punished if you do. And so he's applying a different standard to this situation. And I understand his concern about slippery slope. What he's trying to say is, as soon as we start taking away people's freedoms, what's to stop us from taking more? And that's his big thing, right? He got banned. YouTube blacklisted him. Like, things got tough for him as he did the COVID stuff, and he was fantastic throughout most of the lockdowns. But he's not applying the logic consistently. If the act is wrong, we simply state that it's wrong, and then we find a way to provide justice. And he's not able to account for that at this point.
If anybody's watching, let us know what you think. We're not opposed to talking to people who disagree with us, of course. We love talking to people who disagree with us.
We did that yesterday.
We did that a lot yesterday. We were actually out at the abortion clinic talking to people who disagreed with us and having an interesting time.
Yeah, I just was thinking of your one buddy.
Yeah. We made a friend who didn't want to be a friend, and it went interesting. Anyways,
to acknowledge his concern, if he invoked God and he said, God has made mothers and fathers the protectors of their children, and some of them are going to be bad protectors. And so I tend to agree to some extent that we can't have the government just going into people's houses all the time saying, you know what, you're not taking care of your kid well enough by whatever standard we've now come up with, so now we take your kids. and or
Right.
we impose this or that upon you. So I can see where he's worried that things could lead, but I think we can define a difference between murder and abuse and maybe not being the best caretakers. I think that those are three different categories that can be dealt with. And yes, it's sad that there are children everywhere who are suffering from poor protectors, as he called them. But I don't think that because we allow parents a certain amount of freedom to be poor protectors in a lot of cases justifies systematic dismemberment of the unborn in the womb.
Right. That's where the government needs to step in and needs to stop killing.
Yeah.
It needs to stop people from killing other people. It needs to stop people from stealing, just like the example that you brought up of his bank account.
Yeah, but his
So-
argument really doesn't address his exception.
Right.
His argument is like, well, some people are bad protectors of children, so therefore we're not going to do anything about it. So therefore, it's okay to kill your kid if you were raped. Well, it doesn't actually follow. It's like a separate argument,
Yeah.
which almost contradicts some of the other things he said at this point, or maybe it does actually contradict other things.
Yeah. No, I think that was pretty encapsulated. Again, anybody who's watching this, we love JP. We think he said a lot of good stuff, and we're excited to react to this and put it up there. Let us know what you think, and I'm sure we'll be back with another reaction here soon.
Yeah, we'd like to make sure that anyone watching understands that our worldview comes from the realization that Jesus Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that he was sent into the world by God in order to make atonement for his people's sins. And so when Jesus Christ came into the world, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, he lived the life that all sinners, including me, Elijah, JP Sears, and anyone watching this, could not live. And by living that perfect life and then his vicarious death on the cross in the place of others, he made propitiation for the sins of all those who would believe in him. And his resurrection from the dead 3 days later proved that he was God. It sealed the deal that there's a new covenant in his blood whereby all those who come to him can be forgiven of their sins for all eternity. And that is the worldview we come from. It's what we want everyone to believe, and it's what we want JP Sears to believe, and that's the worldview that gives us the foundation to even judge JP's statements about abortion.
Amen. So that's more important than this, because that's the foundation. The Bible and the gospel is the foundation here. So if you have questions about that, let us know, and we will definitely respond to those.
Amen.